grandmother. She died a few years ago. I think it's been about 7 or 8 years now. But my grandma died at about 83 years old. This is my mother and me when I graduated from high school. It's hard to really see. But my point is, my mom was born in 1953. My grandma was probably in her mid-20s when she had my mom, so I think my grandmother was born in the 1920s. So in the 1960s, she was in her 40s. And as we all know, in the 1960s, America was a totally different place. Racism was legal. But I'm not going to tell you my grandmother had a rough time, my mom had a rough time. Yes, they did live in predominantly black ghettos. They lived in the projects. At that point in time in the 50s, the projects were built for servicemen. Then eventually they rearranged the projects and they became low-income housing. But back then in the 50s, the projects were great places to live. The fathers lived with their families. My mother lived with her father, her mother, her brothers. And they were for family units. In the projects in the 50s and 60s, you didn't find broken homes. You didn't find homes where the father was missing. You didn't taken over by gangs or drugs. The drug trade is flourishing in these areas. There were normal places that you started your family off in. A young family would start off in the projects. They would work hard and then they would get a house. There was no long-term, I'm staying in the projects forever in order to cheat the system mentality going on back then. All of that changed in these. But I'm here to tell you that I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim. I've had long conversations with my mother. She's 69. My father is 70. My grandmother died a couple years ago at 82. And they experienced real racism. They actually remember when water fountains said, white only, black only. My grandmother told me that she had to live in the projects because she wasn't allowed to get a loan from the bank. There were certain neighborhoods that she couldn't live in because it was whites only. She was a nurse. There were certain hospitals that she couldn't work in because they had white hospitals back then and black hospitals back then. So my grandmother was actually there to see the world open up. She saw the civil rights movement happen. She saw the contributions from white people and black people, and she actually saw the world turn from very racist on a legal level, because racism is legal. Racism is when the institutions of this country and the systems of this country can legally deny you the right to be a citizen. Black people were second-class citizens. My grandmother was there when, she was born in the 20s. I don't even think women had the right to vote when she was born. Her mother didn't have the right to vote. So what I'm saying is she actually saw the world open up. She saw the world become more inclusive, and she saw this country of ours, which is what? When my grandmother was born, America was, 150 years old? This is a young country. They call America an experiment because it started off as an experiment, We don't have a long tradition that goes back thousands of years like China or Russia. We're like 270 years old right now. So she was there for the pivotal moments in the history of this country. She was there when this country opened up and became inclusive. My mom too, my dad too. They were children when legal racism. They don't go around saying that they're victims. They did anything that they wanted to do. My dad wanted to go to college. He went. Yeah, he went to an HBCU, but he became successful. My mom, she worked for the state. At 16 years old, 17 years old, in the late 60s, she got a job for the state of Virginia. My grandmother became a nurse. So we're not victims. And when you speak with people who were actually there when racism was legal, not some 20-year-old who doesn't know anything about it, a 20-year-old who has a mother that may be 40, she doesn't know anything about it because she's too young to remember racism. But they want to tell you that you're a victim. They want you to believe that you don't have any opportunity in this country. Your own black people will tell you that you have no chance to succeed and you'll always be a victim because society is set up against you. Well, why is it that my grandmother, who was born when women didn't have the vote, who was born in the 20s, why was she able to become a nurse, retire, have white friends, black friends, and be all right? She went through Jim Crow. She went through legal segregation. My mom, when she was a little girl, she couldn't get on the bus with white kids. She had to go to the black bus. She was okay. She's not a victim. She doesn't cry about not having opportunity. When I ask them, how do you compare now to back then? They say life is totally, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But back then, when racism was going on, don't get it twisted, white people and black people were still interacting with each other. It wasn't the entire white population that was racist. It was only the politically influential ones, you know? And, yeah, they say life is beautiful now. Things have changed. It's more inclusive. And if you're a minority, if you want to become successful, you can do it. I mean, my grandma wanted to become successful in the 50s, and she did it. And she had all of these odds against her. So it's hard for me to sit there and allow somebody to call me a victim or allow somebody to call themselves a victim who's a minority. Oh, you know, that the system is against us. We'll never be able to succeed because white people have created a systemic institutional form of racism that can never be defeated. It's like Godzilla. And I'm like, no, I'm not a victim. I'll never be a victim. Even the people in my family who were there when it was legally okay to be racist, they weren't victims at the time. They flourished. And they tell me life is better now. Well, before my grandmother died, I asked her, she had a lot of wealth of knowledge. I mean, she was a grown-up in the 50s, in the 40s. You know, she was a teenager in the 30s. And, you know, she was there for the Great Depression, all of that. And she was just a wealth of knowledge. And she told me, she said, you can be what you want to be. If you wake up, if you're born into this world as a black baby, and when you turn 18 and you decide to go to college, you can go. If you decide you want to be a welder, you can do it. You want to be a nurse, you can do it. There's nothing in your way. There was nothing in her way. She wanted to be a nurse. She did it in the height of Jim Crow. So when you go to people that were actually there, that actually experienced racism, and you tell them that they're victims, they're going to tell you, no, I'm not a victim. You're not a victim either. And stop letting these people in the media tell you that.